In the 1930s in Germany, thousands of young girls marched enthusiastically in orderly ranks, singing patriotic hymns and swearing allegiance to the most important individual for them at the moment, Führer. The Union of German Girls was presented as an organization that educated the future mothers of the nation, preparing them for the mission of strengthening the Aryan race. But what was hidden behind the facade of discipline, pride, and unity? The appalling truth about mind manipulation, early pregnancies, and the destruction of individuality as a whole, and preparation for the dark sides of Nazi ideology is still largely unknown to the general public. Boys and girls were supposed to be brought up in different ways. However, everything turned out to be more difficult with the girls, and most of the problems that arose in the lives of young German women due to membership in Nazi youth women's organizations were the result of authorities' attempt to combine the incompatible in these young souls' upbringing. This is Explore History, and let's continue. The main task. Most of the inhabitants of Germany after its defeat in the First World War found themselves on the verge of poverty. The German mark was no longer worth anything. People could not afford not only real estate, transport, or at least decent things, but the simplest primitive services, good food, or a minimum of medicines and medical care. And then new bright teachers appeared in the school, loyal to the NSDAP, or already being in it. Even before 1936, they had been telling poor children what was too good for them to be true. Summer camps, beautiful suits, consistent nutrition, special lessons during which you can learn a lot of, so to speak, great things. Clubs, studios, sections, and participation in parades, for which you do not have to pay anything, but can attend freely. A meeting with the Führer and even getting into the lens of a movie camera, a still absolute novelty. What else did 14 to 18-year-old girls from seemingly hopeless neighborhoods need? The answer is obvious. This was enough. The Hitler Youth and the Union of German Girls provided their nurses with specialized education also at the expense of the state. The main task of the Union was considered to be the upbringing of future racially and ideologically ideal representatives of the fair sex, who would become friends, wives, and mothers. Therefore, classes in the unions were held regularly, as well as training. The first thing that was utmost important for the NSDAP was the attendance of the classes themselves. It got to the point that after several passes, the girls were forcibly delivered using the police. Having come to power, the NSDAP was immediately puzzled by immortality, and for this, it was necessary to establish a conveyor belt for the mass creation of Nazis within Germany itself, and in 4 years on the territory of Austria and the Sudetenland Czech Republic, annexed to the Third Reich. In addition to the Hitler Youth, other important structures appeared within it. One of them is Hitler's Sisters. This faction within Hitler's direct observance soon separated, receiving the name of the League of German Girls. The lion's share of the junior secretaries of the state machine of the Reich, the SS retinue, and the guards of the concentration camps came from here. Family values in the Third Reich. Officially, Hitler's policy towards the family relied on the traditional 3 pillars. But instead of the church, which was not considered necessary although it was not denied, political literacy in the Nazi sense of the term was added to the children and the home relations. Education was not particularly valued, as well as some kind of professional development. Although militarized life in Germany simply did not allow women to be excluded from economic life, so girls had to be involuntarily oriented to socially useful work. And later, they were also assigned military duties, work in hospitals, service as signal women, even anti-aircraft gunners. There were also problems with family building. It was assumed that a real Aryan girl marries in the name of love, but at the same time she was directly forbidden to marry anyone other than a true Aryan. Even more, men, in principle, could marry a woman of non-Aryan origin as long as she was not a Jew or a Gypsy. But Aryans were by definition considered superior to others, and hypergamous marriages, those in which the wife came from a higher social strata, were considered completely unacceptable in all forms. The Nazi state offered girls benefits sort of in a sense of 10 ways to choose a good husband, and it's clear that there was no word about love. And in general, from all the more or less specific recommendations for future wives, it followed that they should not look for love, but the right combination of Nazi ideology and healthy blood in their husbands. The rest is simply not important. Next, the question of children. It was assumed that one woman should give birth to at least 4 children. But from whom were these children to be born if potential fathers died in hundreds of thousands at the fronts? And if a girl has no one to marry and no one to give birth to, then what options did she possibly have? As a result, it turned out that a German woman should be both a mother of many children and a faithful wife, and replace men in work, and help the sick and weak, and even, if necessary, become a soldier and fight in the last lines, defending the Reich's ideals. She had to marry by being a virgin and for love, but only to a true Aryan, who quickly became scarce due to the war and conflicts. In general, an ultimate handywoman in every deed and life aspect. And all these contradictory truths and the recommendations arising from them, the Union of German Girls tried to cram into its members. And at the same time, it is clear that the results were undoubtedly wild. Female version of the Hitler Youth. The Hitlerjugend, in the basic sense, united only young men, though the Nazi leadership considered it necessary to educate girls for their service as well. So, organizations for young German women were created, which were in fact almost officially recognized as the female half of the Hitler Youth. Girls aged 10 to 14 were united in the Girls' Union. For girls aged 14 to 18, there was the Union of German Girls. However, many of them at the age of 17 to 18 moved to its subsidiary structure Faith and Beauty. In fact, it was just a division of the Union for the older age, 17 to 21 years old. On December 1st, 1936, a law was passed explicitly obliging all German teenagers to be members of either the Hitler Youth or the Girls' League. This law was not so rarely bypassed, so membership was not exactly 100%. Nevertheless, at least 82% of young German women in 1933-1945 went through the Union of German Girls. By 1944, it was the largest youth women's organization in the entire world, 4.5 million members. The official task of the union was to educate girls to be loyal friends of ideological Nazis, but the problem was that the Nazi leaders themselves often did not fully understand what it should look like. Requirements for looks. The main features were associated with the Aryan appearance, the full approval of the domestic and international policy of the NSDAP, the leading role of the Führer of the nation, and readiness for specific things, to which today's video is dedicated. So, born in 1930, the Union collapsed only 6 months after the surrender of the Hitler regime. During this time, blonde, blue-eyed girls, sometimes not beautiful at all, were taught to love the great Aryan homeland, which means not just the entire German-speaking world, but first of all Germany, the NSDAP, and Hitler. They taught in campaigns where they had to give a bunch of different oaths. They gave without much second thought. They taught it in political information lessons. They were taught in torchlight marches, dating back to distant paganism. They were taught during sports and patriotic parades, where they demonstrated reproductive Aryan beauty. It was the main tool for the mass production of children from its own kind, as you understood, for a demographic attack on the entire world. Anita von Schoner recalls that Jewish teachers could hear any form of harassment to their faces, and then they were all fired. Meanwhile, most of them managed to win respect, and during the war, the girls of the Union were taught in between caring for the wounded and performing supervisory and other service functions in concentration camps. They were taught in agricultural fields. Maidens helped to harvest voluntarily and compulsorily, and even during participation in air defense affairs. The blonde ladies of Germany wore a white blouse, a navy blue skirt, and a black tie with a symbolic leather hairpin. At sports parades, they appeared in short shirts and t-shirts with a small imperial eagle under the décolleté itself, and at pagan rites, since there is no other way to describe it, in short white dresses of a simple cut. A lot of photos were taken and hundreds of films were shot, which make it clear that they tried to feed only harmonious, in terms of both body and face, young ladies into the lens. In the sections of the organization, the young girls were engaged not only in needlework, folk dances, hikes, physical culture, and pagan parades and sports. There were other things here. Watch next chapter. The horrors of upbringing. Sports education and hygiene skills were required to make the girls from the Union healthy and attractive to men. How else would they create ideal Aryan families and give birth to many children? Yes, most of the exercises for girls were chosen wisely. Gymnastics, athletics, also swimming, hiking in nature, but the girls were also constantly engaged in marches, like recruits in the army. This was required, firstly, to organize the movement of large groups through the streets. The march came out more accurately. And secondly, to participate in various celebrations. Hitler himself was very fond of lightly flirting with girls in such situations. All former members of the Union recalled extremely tired legs and itching muscles after many hours of marching. In preparation for parades, they were forced to stand for half an hour or more with their hands raised in the Nazi salute. If someone could not withstand it, such a girl was beaten on the non-ideological hand. At At the parades themselves, they had to stand motionless for a long time, often in the open sun. Fainting or other signs of lightheadedness were considered a manifestation of weakness. This was not punished, but the girl could be ridiculed. During the performance of duties in the Union, that is, almost all the time, the girl had to wear a uniform. A white blouse, a blue skirt, a blue tie, brown stockings, and a jacket in winter. The uniform was not completely ugly, but it took away its individuality. In addition, the charter strictly regulated hairstyles, prohibited high-heeled shoes, cosmetics, and almost all jewelry. As for hygiene, its requirements were brought to the absolute. The Union could check the house where the girl lives. What if it's not clean enough? Even a tiny spot on a uniform blouse could be a reason for punishment. As a punishment itself, most often the girl was deprived of the right to wear a uniform tie. Such a mark signaled that all the right members of the Union had the free pass to mock and give hard time to this girl. Spying on parents. Completely brainwashed ideologically, girls began to look at the world with completely different eyes. Any attempt by someone to violate the established order, even minimally, led to rejection and even appealed to the relevant services with corresponding complaints. Moreover, complaints could even be received against their own parents. For example, if the girl caught her parents listening to the English radio, then she calmly went to the Gestapo and said what happened. Very often, the girl's parents went to a concentration camp, and the girl, of course, received gratitude from the leadership for her vigilance. It got to the point that girls began to openly spy on their parents, neighbors, and acquaintances. At the same time, they were firmly convinced that they were doing the right thing and for the good of their homeland. One of the former members of the Union, Gertrude Woltmann, recalled, "After all, children were brought up mainly outside the walls of their parents' home. They spied on their own parents not because of their natural anger, but because of their naivety. They believed that, in this case, the parents were committing a crime against the Führer." From Memoirs. Kerstin Ackermann. This German woman ended up in the Hitler Youth, membership in which began at the age of 10 in 1933, and in the Union in 1937, when she turned 14. Frau recalls that in the first case, it was only necessary to fill out an application and a certificate of 4 grades of school, but in the second, to pass a thorough medical examination. And here they were forced to list the names and surnames of all known relatives, if possible even in the distant generations. Then they indicated their religion. The authorities considered the information until 21 days, and only then issued or did not issue an acceptance. Kirsten noted that she joined organizations because of her passion for adventure. They were taken to forests and mountains, to agricultural land, to help farmers, a bonfire, oaths, etc. Though there were girls who went further than the young Ackermann. Look further. Surrogacy. In Germany, the status of a surrogate mother at the time was honorable. Such mothers specially met with SS officers selected for the demographic continuation of Aryan race. The goal is to get pregnant in a comfortable environment. This happened in mansions and castles. Fortunately, there were plenty of them. Blue-eyed and blonde mothers, long-legged and with wide hips, were especially valued by NSDAP. Norwegians and Danes were a priority. But the most curious thing in this whole situation is that the children were born not only for the already existing adoptive parents, but also with the mindset of what will happen later and who should take care of babies. After all, during the period of the unique demographic program, 10 orphanages were created in Germany and another 9 in Norway, and 17 in other European countries. About 20,000 babies were brought up within their walls. Many naive girls from the Union considered it an honor to intimately serve the most famous party bosses of the Nazi state. In 1937 to 1941, the know-how of reproduction on call concerned not only Germany, but also countries as Austria, the Sudeten Czech Republic, and the Scandinavian countries. Also, these lands were required to participate in the Fountain of Life program. When childless people pay a tax, the funds from which were used to support large families. Only families with 4 or more children were supported, and even those who have 1, 2, or 3 children had to pay tax. It's just that the more children you have, the less you pay. It was ruinous precisely for the childless. We can add even more. A child from an Aryan was considered capable, regardless of whether he was born in a legal serious marriage or after a party with officials of various ranks. The famous words from the characteristics of the Reich Kanzlei, "the one has not been seen in discrediting connections," concerned exclusively the cultural, political, national, and racial question. Specifically, sexual debauchery was considered the absolute norm. From the point of view of morality, all of the above seems to be kind of absurdity. But if you turn on the logic of that time and place, then everything was dictated by a certain type of mass consciousness, racial being the top priority. It was imposed by propaganda. The languages of the Germanic group, Nordic appearance, lack of sentimentality, internal rejection of multiculturalism, and the absence of hereditary diseases made people a special race. And this race killed everyone else and multiplied more than ever. Genes, mental attitudes, and a special Aryan culture were to be passed on from the appropriate age. It had to prevail over the one that Europe had absorbed earlier, over the Christian faith. Therefore, people looked like madness from the outside, worshipping as some totem, stylized as paganism. This also applied to girls. Marrying a dead man. The strangest and most terrible thing that teenage girls from the German Union fell victim to were related to relationships with men. And all because there was no one to give birth to and marry. And they talked about it all the time. In theory, extramarital affairs and childbirth were not encouraged in the Reich. The leaders of the Union were offered to resign if they became pregnant out of wedlock. But despite this, even very authoritative Nazi leaders supported and promoted a different approach. Himmler believed that out-of-wedlock births were beneficial and supported single mothers. After all, these are children for the Führer. What difference does it make how they turned out? The SS created the Lebensborn structure, which helped to give birth and place children to single mothers who suffered when it came to marriage. Martin Bormann's wife, an active member of the Reich women's movement, promoted the idea of polygamy as a way to solve the problem of a shortage of men. She knew that her husband had a mistress and she only approved of it, and she warmly recommended other German women to openly do the same. Accordingly, on the one hand, girls in the German Union were taught that they should give birth in marriage and marry by being virgins. On the other hand, practice has shown that illegitimate children are more good than bad, and constant conversations on these topics contributed to the early formation of sexual interest. The marriageable age for girls was set at 16 years. That is, about half of the Union was already brides. An SS man was considered an ideal candidate for a husband, but he had to get the go-ahead for marriage from the organization. And for this, among other things, he had to submit a photo of his bride in a swimsuit. They were considered by many officials from the SS Kanzlei. Lectures on family building were often held jointly for young men from the Hitler Youth and girls from the Girls' Union. It's not surprising that after that, numerous connections were established. Girls often gave themselves to many boys and gave birth to many children, even those who were 15 to 16 years old. At the same exact time, pregnant girl was expelled from the Union. The law prepared the girl for much more savage forms of marital relations. For one example, a German woman was allowed to marry remotely. That is, to get married in the absence of a soldier groom. An even more exotic option is to register a marriage with an already officially deceased groom. The goal is the honorary status of the widow of a military man, the legitimization of the child, if it's foreseen, and the right to a pension. And although everything is clear and even seems logical, but where is common sense and natural way of things here? And let's recall that these proposals also concern 16 to 17-year-olds. Constant psychological pressure and filling the head with the ideas of serving the Führer and the Aryan men naturally caused the connection of these two images in the girls' brains. Girls from the Union sent Hitler bags of letters with quite unequivocal confessions and proposals every day. Candidates for giving birth to him numbered in the thousands. By the way, they had reasons to hope for a miracle, since the Führer categorically refused to officially marry Eva Braun. He did it only immediately before his suicide. That is, he was listed as a single man. The Führer's office made up carbon copies and took on the pencil of especially zealous correspondents. The Gestapo could hold a preventive conversation with them. Leave him alone, they said. Do not bother the Führer. If this did not work, the Fraulein in love was sent to a mental hospital. Especially zealous people could get to the mountain residence of the Führer Berghof and stand next to him for many hours, shouting greetings and waiting for the opportunity to catch a single glimpse of the idol. Maria Müller, a former member of the Union, said that once she, along with a large group of other girls, chanted for several hours in a row calls for the Führer to look out of the window. He indeed looked out, and the girls indulged in stormy joy on this occasion for several more hours. They barely made it home. They were so tired and desperate for his attention. Yes, the League of German Girls did not practice those particularly cynical and cruel forms of breaking the consciousness that existed in the Hitler Youth. There was essentially no goal to raise girls cruel and belligerent, but there was something else: constant pressure, contradictory instructions, eternal control and excessive concentration on the sexual issue, and the never-ending problem of childbirth. The result was perversions of maternal instinct, early sexual relations and pregnancies, readiness for abnormal forms of relationships, such as polygamy or official marriage with a dead person. That is, mental deviations are in the medical sense. Finally, the most frightening consequence in a closed topic is that often girls from the Union volunteered to work in the SD security service or were mentally open to work in the concentration camp system. Germany needs people. Here they are and ready to serve. If you look carefully at the biographies of many of the most terrible women guards, it turns out that some of them went through school of the Union of German Girls. Moreover, the pupils, again, did not see anything wrong with bullying or destroying people from the inside. If Germany needs it, then it's fair and should be happening. And enough has been said about what the former pupils of the Union did in the concentration camps themselves. That was Explore History. Thank you for watching, subscribe and leave a like. Click on the episodes on the screen and let the history not be forgotten. See you later.